Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Blue Jay Center podcast presented by the Sick Podcast Network. And we have some breaking news for you on this show, so let's get into it.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to the Sick Podcast. Blue Jays Center.
Bautista drives it deep left field. Gone!
The sickest Toronto Blue Jays podcast. It's gonna be sick.
Myself, Cole Whiston, and Rob Pentalman here with you again to talk Blue Jays baseball on the Sick Podcast Network. And as I said, we have some breaking news. As we are recording here on Monday night at 6 p.m. Eastern, the Jays have just announced that Yimi Garcia has hit the 15-day IL. And that means that the top three relievers coming into the 2024 season for the Blue Jays are all no longer currently available on the Blue Jays big league roster. Yimi Garcia, Jordan Romano is also on the IL, and Eric Swanson was optioned earlier in the year. Rob, how bad is this, especially considering the gauntlet that the Jays are currently in?
It's brutal, man. I mean, even with all those guys, I mean, not all those guys healthy at one time, but we talked about how this bullpen has really struggled. We've reamed off a bunch of numbers, how they're bottom barrel, basically bottom of the league in just about all the major categories. So yeah, without Yimi Garcia, it's going to be really tough to piece it together. You hope that Jordan Romano can come back and figure it out. But yeah, right now, this bullpen looks paper thin might be an understatement. We had a good vibes over the weekend with a nice series win against the Guardians. But yeah, moving forward, I'm just not completely sure how they'll be able to piece this together, if I'm being completely honest with you.
Yeah, checking in on updates most recently on Jordan Romano, he has just finally started to, I think, throw from 90 feet. He is, because he is a reliever and, only pitches one inning max most appearances, ramping him up isn't necessarily that big of a task, but it's still, right now, not close. Like, we're not within a week of Jordan Romano coming back on this team. So in the interim, it will be Chad Green closing out games for the Toronto Blue Jays when they have a chance to win it. But as we know, and as Kevin Gausman has stated, unless the starting pitchers are perfect, we're going to need a lot more than just one guy to bridge to the ninth inning.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and I think that's why. I mean, maybe they're not all that correlated, but that's why maybe you've seen a Yariel Garcia, Yariel Rodriguez get called up, and all of a sudden, I'm assuming now he's going to assume that fifth starter role, which will allow hence Bowden Francis to pitch in a more of a bulk role in relief, and hence the other effect is that Trevor Richards is going to be in a high leverage reliever right now because obviously they have no other options. We mentioned Eric Swanson at the beginning of the year. He's still very much struggling in Buffalo. And you've had now four lefties with the new guy getting called up. Do you have the
Brandon
name?
Isert,
Yeah, exactly. Buffalo Bison's legend. So now you have four lefties, all of which you don't feel all that great about, even though Brendan Little did have a nice outing yesterday in the eighth inning. And obviously, with Bowden Francis, Trevor Richards, and Chad Green, we came into this season talking about how the Blue Jays bullpen was going to be a source of strength. I mean, just reading off all those names, it's hard. It's hard to think how we got all the way to this point. But honestly, that's just the lifespan of major league relievers. They're very volatile, and here you are, 2.5 months into the season, with that, considering what you had coming in, just really, really just underwhelming.
Yeah. To be clear, the corresponding move for Yimi going the IL is Brandon Isert, as we just mentioned, from AAA Buffalo. He has a over 6 ERA in AAA so far this year. Obviously, you never know. Maybe this stuff's good. We'll find out. He will. I will assume he is going to get a look every once in a while in the next week or so because he's going to have to, unless this pitching staff, the starting rotation, goes on an absolute tear. So let's get into that Guardians series because I do want to talk about Brandon Little
Back to the good vibes.
Yeah, and his little bit of a resurgence with this bullpen. He has become, at least for the last couple outings, a more reliable lefty out of the pen. But the Jays grab a serious win over the Guardians over this last weekend. They lost the first game, won the last two. And as we stated on the Blue Jay Center shows on Instagram, there isn't a whole lot of positivity even in this series win. For example, just to put it in a vacuum, they hit 2 home runs in the series win. 2 home runs, one off the bat of Ernie Clement. that is currently how the Jays are going to get done, is through small ball, is through these guys hitting singles and managing to actually score runners. But we are still lacking, the clutch hit aspect, but also the bullpen yesterday, for example, we're up 7-2, and they damn well wanted to make it interesting, bringing the lead back down to 7-6 before we ended up getting the win. Just give me your thoughts on how that series win felt for yourself.
Honestly, it does feel pretty good. I mean, it would be a little unfair to come on here after they had won series against a lesser competition and admit that despite the fact that they're winning series, we're not all that
Right.
impressed because of the competition. So it is fair that
That's
when you
true.
beat a team that's 20 games over 500, by the way, I mean, we've been doing this for multiple years now. We have this quote unquote juggernaut team in the AL Central, and we see them as for the first time all year. And that team doesn't, they're not a 20 game over 500 team. I'm sorry. I mean, they are actually, but you know what I mean.
Right.
They're just it's just not that impressive. I mean, Steven
Yep.
Kwan's good, obviously Jose Ramirez, but it's not like that lineup scares you a whole ton, despite the fact that statistically they are very good. I mean, I've only watched them for 3 games. Obviously, I'll defer to the bigger sample, but that rotation, I mean, you have Carlos Carrasco, a guy who used to be really good, but now is just a shell of himself in the year of our Lord 2024. Yesterday, the guy Lively coming in with great numbers, but yet you watch him and it's like, no, he's not scary. He's not scaring anyone off. I mean, he
Yep.
doesn't throw. The stuff isn't that great. Even the first guy they couldn't hit, Logan Allen. I mean, his numbers got a whip like close to 1.5, an ERA over 5. I mean, it's
Yep.
just it's hard to imagine that team is 20 games over 500. Just a reminder of just how much of a blessing it is to be
Right.
located in the AL Central. But nevertheless, yeah, that's a good team relative to baseball standards. The Blue Jays got a win, got a series win, so you can't help but be happy. Obviously, I think a big part of it was Kevin Gosman's comments on Friday. It's nice to see that that might have lit a bit of a fire under them because he scored 5 runs and 7 runs the next
Right.
2 games and one. So it's good to see that. Overall, despite the fact that we left that series with battle scars, obviously our bullpen is now a disaster. We just reamed off all
Yeah.
the names, and I'm terrified just going through them in my head again. But nevertheless, I think as a Blue Jays fan, you got to be happy with a series win, and hopefully they can finally get back to 500 with a win tonight against the Red Sox.
Yeah, they do open up a series against the Red Sox. Obviously, we will preview that later in the show to finish things off.
Oh, and I forgot to
But
mention the Buffalo Boys. The Buffalo Boys. I know that's got to be the
that's
biggest story.
so
Yes.
that's exactly where I'm going next. Is
Yeah.
regarding this series win against the Guardians. A lot of that had to do with the guys coming up from Buffalo, the call-ups, the Spencer Horwitz, the Addison Barger, and of course the ones from previous years, Davis Schneider and Ernie Clement. So all of those guys led this team to a series win this weekend. Obviously, the newest additions being Horwitz and Addison Barger.
Yeah, Addison Barger. We haven't done a podcast since he got called up. Obviously, he's gotten called up earlier this year. We talked about that, but it was just for me personally. I questioned that decision. I mean, obviously, you cut Daniel Vogelbach, and again, I still feel like there's a little miscommunication. I was never advocating for Daniel Vogelbach. All I was saying was that if you're going to have a quote unquote placeholder for that 26 roster spot, it should be a guy that you don't really care about, a Daniel Vogelbach, a journeyman, rather than Addison Barger, a guy who you want to get everyday playing appearances and consistent at bats just every single day. But obviously, they made that decision, and obviously, with that decision comes maybe not a promise, but I got to be at least 4 times a week, 4 or 5 times a week. Got to be playing. Obviously, he plays a lot of positions, which is why I was kind of disheartened when the lineup came out today and neither him nor Spencer Horwitz was in it. But we saw yesterday what he can do. 2 very hard hit singles, a ball off the bat at 108, another one at 105 or something like that.
Yep.
So yeah, we saw the tools. His first career RBI, first career multi-hit game. Obviously he's a friend of the show. We got to talk to him
Yep.
in Buffalo. So I mean, I hope that by calling him up, there's kind of a wink, wink under the table agreement with a Justin Turner or a George Springer that hey, we understand what your paycheck says, we understand what your pedigree says, but right now we're gonna have to give you a little less playing time and the young guys a little bit more playing time. So I'll be honest, I was underwhelmed by not seeing Addison Barger in the lineup today, but hopefully by calling him up, he's going to get at least somewhat semi-regular everyday plate appearances.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that I've been, again, impressed. Addison Barger very much fits, like a Walmart version, to put it bluntly, of a Daulton Varsho, a guy that can be relatively good defensively while also just playing the game hard. He might not give you the offensive ability that you're looking for, but he will play the game hard. He will run at every ball, and he will obviously try on defense. So that is a big thing for a lot of fans when it comes to these young guys getting the call up, is just showing some effort. We've obviously seen a lack thereof this year from a lot of the big league roster. So I completely agree. I like the Addison Barger move. Spencer Horwitz has actually proven that his bat and his eye definitely plays at the big league level so far through a small sample size. But I agree with you. This game, not including a Spencer Horwitz against a righty on the mound,
Yep.
or an Addison
Both
Barger against a righty on the mound, doesn't make any sense. But as I said in the chat earlier, when James, a co-host on the show, obviously, also was questioning the move, I said that's just trying to make sense of a team that doesn't make sense, and we're playing a bad game, and that's what we've done all year, questioning their lineup decisions from game to game, and it doesn't matter. They will never. I don't know if they will ever come up with a lineup where the fans legitimately go, you know what, that makes sense, because every game it seems like this. You look at the game one against the Guardians, the same thing happened. You produced 3 hits. Those 3 hits came from Erno Clement on 2 doubles, I believe it was, and Davis Schneider also got a hit in that game. The very next day, both of them sitting on the bench.
Yeah, I mean, it is important to recognize that. I mean, I can't remember if it was last year or the year before. 162 games, the Jays ran out 143 unique lineups. So I think it's important to recognize that lineup will shift every single day. There's never going to be a set lineup, especially not for this team, a team that struggles offensively like they have. But I do agree. I mean, not necessarily in terms of the Ernie Clement. I do think that's a little bit more, chicken before the egg. I think the reason why he had good results is because he was put in favorable spots. And I don't think he's the type of guy where having a good game will earn him, an everyday spot the next game. Like it will earn him a guarantee.
Clearly not. Clearly not.
Yeah, no, for sure. But in this case, I actually, I'm like to me at this point, I don't care what data suggests because there is none. First and foremost, that George Springer and Justin Turner should be playing above those 2 guys. I mean, aside from just the contract and status, I mean, that's got to be the only reason. I mean, those guys look awful.
Just the way I haven't heard.
Played. I mean, and to his credit, Turner a little bit better so far in the month of June, but still, I mean, with the way Spencer Horwitz has looked so far in very limited plate appearances, admittingly, I don't think it makes sense that he's vacating the DH hole tonight.
100%. And I don't know where Turner sits on this, but the George Springer narrative has become very talked about, and to the point where it's reached George Springer's mouth, and George Springer's had to address the backlash that he's been getting so far through his performances. And obviously, a guy with his pedigree and his reputation in the league as being a team player, everything he said is exactly what we were expecting him to say, which is, yeah, I'm acknowledging that I am not playing good enough. And yet, and besides that, John Schneider still goes, you know what? No, we're riding with you. When it sounds like George Springer would accept taking a back step right now to at least give him some time to figure things out behind the scenes and give these guys an actual shot in the everyday lineup. Like, I don't understand why we have to ride with guys after the 200 at-bat sample, which they are both at now, well past that for George Springer. He's at like 240. I do not understand.
We'll go further. We'll go further. I mean, if you want to go back all the way to the opening day of last season, I mean, we're talking...
Right, exactly.
That's got to be almost now coming up on a season and a half of sample. George Springer has an OPS that starts with a 6 in that time. I mean, George Springer's not a good hitter anymore. He's just done. Yeah. It is what it is. I mean, like, you obviously you hear about, obviously Nelson Cruz is a guy who was an outfielder who had really good numbers late into his career, and obviously he had that Albert Pujols season a couple years ago. The reality is the vast majority of guys decline at age 34. George Springer heading into his age 35 season, your eyes are not deceiving you. He is a player who is in decline. Justin Turner, we have data. He's number 1 in sprint speed. His bat is not fast anymore. He just doesn't have the ability to swing the bat and catch up to these high 98 mile per hour fastballs that pitchers are throwing nowadays. They are in decline. And unfortunately, the lack of urgency, which we've said on this podcast, is just, it's going to hurt the Blue Jays. It's going to affect them because it took way too long to move him down from that leadoff spot. And unfortunately, we're seeing him. He's still going to get everyday at-bats, everyday plate appearances. For a team that's serious about winning, if that's their number 1 priority, that to me, that just can't happen. I mean, no disrespect to George Springer. He's not, he's a guy who's had his moments in this city, in this market of being really good. And obviously the last 3 years, he's been, a very integral part of the roster, but he's just not getting it done anymore. And unfortunately, I don't see a change coming anytime soon. I think that he's going to be getting everyday at bats. for the most part for the rest of this season. But I think that this is an off-season topic, but I think you got to find a way to somewhat lessen the cushion on that contract because there's just no way. I don't see any practical way that he's going to be on this roster the next 2 years and playing every day if this is what we're getting in year 4.
Yeah, if you think that it optically looks bad to hold $25 million on your bench, well, then you have to figure a way to get rid of that $25 million in the offseason.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
And guess what? I mean, I've said this before. John Schneider, Ross Atkins, whether George Springer plays or not, he's going to get his checks, but you're not after this
Right.
season. You're gone after this season. So you might want to think about what you want to prioritize. You want to prioritize some millionaire's ego or your job.
Exactly.
So that's I gotta say. But more on a positive note, we did win a series. Daulton Varsho. This is not Stat Genius, but I came up with this number, and it's been alive for a while. A lot of it's due to David Schneider underperforming. Daulton Varsho. Now we talked about how great his defense has been. Second grand slam of the season yesterday, which effectively put that game. I mean, not out of reach because the Guardians did come back, but
right.
that was the big blow. That was the big hit of the game for the Jays. We mentioned him. Glove first. Can you get anything on offense? They've gotten a lot more than you could have expected on offense so far. Obviously, we all know number 1 on the team in home runs, second in OPS and OPS plus behind Vladdy amongst qualified hitters. So David Schneider just went under that mark, so he's below Varsho now, and obviously Danny Jansen is not qualified. So yeah, I mean, Daulton Varsho being your second best offensive player, I mean, that as much of a Varsho fan as I am, I think that's a tough pill to swallow. But credit to him. Credit to him for having an incredibly good bounce back season. And yeah, I mean, all those people, naysayers about the trade, you might want to revisit that just a little bit.
Yep, I completely agree. I wanted to mention one thing on the bat speed regarding Justin Turner. It is funny that Justin Turner is obviously the worst bat speed in baseball, and then right behind him is Steven Kwan, who's batting .390.
That's insane. That's got to be
insane.
Which doesn't make sense.
Yeah, absolutely insane. How does a guy who can get to every single pitch and never strikes out have the second worst bat speed in baseball? I was shocked when I saw that the other day. Okay.
Also, he's just annoying. Like I know that we just faced him. I'm not looking forward to Friday facing him in that leadoff spot again. He just feels like impossible to get out. I mean, with the way he just slaps the ball over the place. That's a side note. I mean, Steven Kwan, that's an annoying hitter, man. That's obviously a compliment to him on how good he's been this season. I mean, he's literally doing the Luis Ariz thing, but much better so far this season.
Right. Yeah, he's got almost 1,000 OPS. Bo Bichette also is dealing with some injuries. He's missed 3 straight games. Now tonight will be his 3rd game missed with a calf injury. I don't know if this is going to land him on the IL, but if we're being completely honest, he has a negative B-WAR. This is a bit of a blessing in disguise, and hopefully a couple days off from live ABs and not performing to your level, a couple days away from not having to make tough plays at shortstop that you should make because you're a lifetime shortstop, I think might actually be a good thing for Bo Bichette.
It might be a good thing for him to just give him a couple days of a breather. I will not agree with the fact that it's a blessing in disguise for the team because as much as Bo Bichette has been awful this season, he's really struggled, man. And we've talked about our frustration. Me and James did a whole segment last podcast just outlining all the numbers and how bad he's been. I mean, his complete nosedive from his career numbers. I still don't think that this best version of this lineup doesn't include Bo Bichette playing shortstop. I still feel like the potential, the upside, and obviously the track record is enough to warrant him every day at bats. I don't think this is a Springer or Justin Turner situation where, I agree. I think that less playing time for them, the better. I still feel that Bo Bichette figuring it out is still the pathway for this team to be at least somewhat respectable offensively. He's, out of all the guys in the lineup, the only guy that I legitimately see coming back and having a bounce back second half. Because all the other guys, there's a reason why they're struggling,
Right.
They're either not good hitters or they're declining, like the guys we talked about earlier. So I don't think that Ernie Clement, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, both of those guys have definitely held their own on both sides of the ball this season. I still feel like if you're going to make the playoffs, you're going to go on a run and have any expectations moving forward, it's got to start with Bo Bichette figuring it out. So hopefully he comes back and hopefully he finally starts hitting.
Yeah, just to clarify on the blessing in disguise, I meant from the perspective of he needs to spend some time to figure things out. I also meant from the perspective of these young guys getting the call up. That leads to them getting at bats, which obviously leads to them being able to show what their worth is right now. So I hope that it all obviously works on the end. But I agree with you. There's only one guy in this lineup I trust to get back to career numbers, and that is Bo Bichette. I completely agree. Okay, speaking of injuries, how about we finally get some positive news in this podcast? Yariel Rodriguez seems destined to return this Friday, making a start against Cleveland in Game 1 in Cleveland, because that is the next bullpen day on the schedule, based off of the last two or three times through the order. He had a rehab start yesterday. I don't know the numbers from yesterday, but I know the first game was really good. I assume yesterday was good as well.
I don't have the numbers in front of me exactly. From what I heard, it wasn't quite as great as the previous start. However, the focus on this start, you always got to consider the fact that he knew he was going to get called up.
Right.
They purposely had him stay out there a little longer to build up his pitch count. You got to think you're tune-up start before the majors. You're not going out there trying to dice a AAA lineup. You're more so trying to work on some things, trying to get iron out some tweaks before you go and face a really good Cleveland Guardians team on Friday in Cleveland. So I'll discount a lot of the numbers for what they were. But yeah, in terms of my overall thoughts on Yariel coming back, I mean, we saw him have a cup of coffee earlier in the season. We saw a lot of flashes. I still feel like there were still some gaps that, basically you looked at him and said, okay, you can see why they were interested, but maybe not right away in terms of him being ready to be a big league starter. Fortunately, he's gonna have a shot. He's gonna have a shot. He's gonna have a leash, because with Alek Manoah hurt, with Ricky Tiedemann still not ready yet, with Bowden Francis, who to his credit, we talked about having an unredeemable outing against a bad Oakland A's team. 4 shutout innings against the Guardians. So got to tip your cap to. I know that's a sensitive term around these parts before you didn't slip there. But yeah, he was really good against the Guardians on Saturday. But I still feel like, despite that good start, he's not a guy that you want the ball in his hands every 5 days. They aced that opener game, but yeah, Yariel Rodriguez at this moment has the highest upside in the whole organization to be that fifth starter slot. And after a couple good games in Buffalo, it's nice to see him get a look. Hopefully, it goes well. Hopefully, it goes well, because it would be a really nice story if their top pitching investment this offseason ends up panning out and giving them value.
Yeah, 100%. That would certainly do a lot for the narrative perspective on Ross Atkins. Just in general, we mentioned off the top, it matters because we need him. Absolutely need him. We can't run that bullpen day every 5 days, especially when that ends up being Bowden Francis and Trevor Richards. Plus, with the bullpen injuries, that also means we do need Trevor Richards and Bowden Francis to be the leverage guys or the bulk guys in those days. So Yariel Rodriguez will definitely be paired on those days with a Richards, Meza, or Bowden Francis. But it is
also because
well timed, to say the least.
And also because there's no sixth starter in Buffalo. I mean, if he doesn't go well, I mean, all of a sudden you have to go back to that Bowden Francis half-star role, which we don't feel very confident in. I mean, it's worked a couple times now, but obviously you can't count on that if you're trying to contend. And we know this Blue Jays team, they're going to have to come out and pitch really well. They're going to have elite starting pitching in order to make the postseason. And they have gotten it. Over the course of the last month, they've been a top 5 team in terms of just starters numbers, starters ERA, stuff like that. So yeah, they're gonna need something from Yariel, because unfortunately you don't want to throw this kind of pressure on basically a rookie major leaguer, but there's really nobody else. There's really no second option.
Yeah. Okay. As we're getting into the second half of the show, we're gonna head into Stat Genius, which also leads us to a bit of a surprise, which I'm sure we provide to you most times on the Stat Genius section. All right, Rob, I will let you go first, but I do have something after you're done.
So I want to talk about yesterday's starter, José Berríos. We haven't mentioned him yet in this podcast. That's because it was a pretty run-of-the-mill game for him. This stat, let me preface by saying it would have been a lot better had he got that last out, or the battery faced Schneemann or whatever his name is on the Guardians. He hit that home run against him, preventing him from having a quality start. And this is the theme of my segment. José Berríos, in terms of quality starts, has been excellent this season. Prof, Cole, 15 starts this season. How many quality starts do you think Jose Berríos has had?
10.
10. You said 10? So very close. He actually has had 11. However,
Oh,
the 4 starts that he hasn't had a quality start. Let's go through them. We obviously know the Philly start. It's highly emphasized. Oh, if you just take away the Philly start, he's having a great
oh
season.
yeah.
We know you can't do that. But yeah, you have that Philly
Yeah.
start. The next one was yesterday, a game where he was literally an out away from getting a quality start before that home run. We all know that he pitched pretty well for the most part, and obviously the Blue Jays won, so everything's good there. The time before that was the start just before this last start in Milwaukee, where he went 5 2/3, giving up 3 earned runs. For those of you who don't know, and I should have prefaced this, a
Yeah.
quality start, 6 innings, 3 earned runs, 3 or less earned runs. He went 5 2/3, giving up 3 earned runs. So literally as close as you can get to a quality start. And the last one, the fourth one that it wasn't a quality start, was in Kansas City in a game that only went 5 innings. So it was impossible for him to have a quality start.
Yeah.
So when people always say, outside of that Philly start, Jose Berríos is giving you an excellent chance to win. It's just a fact. He's given the Blue Jays a phenomenal chance to win every start but one. He's
Right.
had
Every single
quality
one.
start,
Yeah.
quality start, or as close to a quality start as you can possibly get in every other start but that Philly start. So just tip of the cap to Jose Berríos there. I've mentioned a lot on. I think that it's a little concerning that he doesn't strike anyone out. He's having like a career low strikeout percentage, K percentage. Regardless, however he's doing it, he's getting the results, and the Blue Jays certainly need it from him. So good job, Jose Berríos. I'm throwing out your praise. You've been good. You've been really good this season.
It's been absolutely fantastic. The ace of this staff. And I know I teed this segment up with surprises. That obviously probably doesn't come as a surprise to most people that we are just reiterating how good he's actually been and furthering the perspective on it. But mine definitely might come as a surprise. We talked about the Buffalo guys earlier in the show, and that's where my Stat Genius section goes this week. Who do you think leads the team amongst the Buffalo guys from last year and this year in Baseball Reference WAR? And if you know the answer, then don't be facetious about it.
Wait, hang on. So can you repeat that? So from last year to this year, who leads the team in Baseball Reference WAR?
No,
Like,
so
on
just
the
from
Major
those.
League roster.
Sorry.
Yeah.
From Davis Schneider, Addison Barger, Spencer Horwitz, and Ernie Clement, who do you think in 2024 leads in Baseball Reference WAR?
So basically, from just in 2024.
Right, just in 2024.
Well, I mean, the obvious answer is Davis Schneider, but because you prefaced it by saying it's unexpected, I'm gonna go with Ernie Clement.
Yeah, Ernie Clement leads the Buffalo quadruple, whatever you want to call it, whatever the tandem for 4 would have been.
The roommates plus Addison Barger.
He leads. Well, oh yeah, what? Say that again.
I said the Florida spring training roommates plus Addison Barger.
Oh yes. That is a good way of putting it. He leads in Baseball Reference WAR, a 1.2 WAR to Davis Schneider's 0.8. So for all the people that think Ernie Clement is the guy, the odd man out, the guy that should be getting sent down for Orelvis Martinez, who can't play defense at second base, I don't want to hear it. Ernie Clement this year has been the best out of those call-ups. So let's get over it and stop discrediting what Ernie Clement brings to this team. And keep in mind, that's with him getting less of a leash than the rest of the guys in this staff. Now, by all means, you could come back at me and say, well, that's why he succeeded, and that's why he hasn't had the chance to bring the WAR down. I'm sure if you take a month sample of Davis Schneider, it probably looks really good. Yes, that's all true. But you can't tell me that he hasn't been productive or as productive as a Davis Schneider, who we all sing praises for day in and day out, deservingly. But the guys that continue to say that Ernie Clement's the odd man out, stop it. Orelvis Martinez would be lucky to put up a 1.2 WAR through 120 at-bats in the majors. He'd be lucky to do that right now.
So I have 2 points to that. One of them is going to, this is weird, it's going to disagree with you, but also validate your point at the same time.
Okay.
Not really disagree, but more so fact check. WAR, it's a counting stat. So regardless of, it doesn't matter. Playing time doesn't matter. Opportunities doesn't matter. It's a counting stat. So the more you play, the better chance you have of accumulating more WAR.
Yes.
Down. So yeah, that argument does not fit here in terms of the Ernie Clement, he's more favorable, plays less, so he has a higher WAR. That's not a thing. That's not how it works.
It's not directly a thing, but it is certainly a conversation.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that leads to my second point. I think a big reason as to why that is the case. We all know Baseball Reference. You've claimed before
Yep.
overvalued defensively at times, and David Schneider's playing out of position. He didn't come up as a left fielder. He's playing exclusively in left field, basically. Obviously, sometimes on the infield, but he came up as a second baseman. And because the Blue Jays have completely lacked offense all season long, it's forced him to play left field. It's forced to be this decade's version of Chris Colabello, where you just had a great bat playing out of position. So that's obviously hurt his WAR in terms of overall value, just offensively and just period. I think few would argue that David Schneider has meant more to this team than Ernie Clement in terms of the role he's had to play out of necessity. So I think that kind of explains it. But yeah, no, overall, I'm pretty surprised. Shout out to Ernie Clement for under the radar having a very good season as a Blue Jays, basically end of the roster spot guy. I mean, you don't expect 25th, 26th men to go out and have 1.2 Baseball Reference WAR in less than half a season. So credit to him. He's definitely in the role he's been given, maximized it. It looks like.
Exactly, and I'm going to take it a step further. You combine David Schneider and Ernie Clement, that's better than Vladimir Guerrero Jr.'s Baseball Reference WAR. Ernie Clement and David Schneider, you put them together, and all of a sudden you have Vladimir Guerrero Jr. And I'll take that even a step further. Guess who also has a better WAR than Vladimir Guerrero Jr.? Just to put the nail in the coffin on the whole thing, Teoscar Hernandez.
Okay.
He has a 2 WAR this year in LA. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
I will say.
I know
a pretty good Vlad game yesterday, though. I know he's been struggling recently, but he got 3 hits, including the impossible to have a deeper single. It was a single that went almost 400 feet off the wall. So yeah, shout out to Vlad. Hit the ball hard a few times yesterday. Got 3 hits. So yeah, we'll need it. We'll need it for Vlad. I mean, he's kind of cooled off a bit, but overall, I still think a pretty good season overall. I mean, obviously underwhelming based on expectations, but for the most part, he's been all right.
Yep. My big thing last year was defending him because he was our best player offensively for the majority of the first half, and so far that argument will ring true again. He's been our best player offensively through the first half, so hopefully he can step it up a bit more when it comes to home runs, obviously, throughout the second half, as we've called for, I feel like, the last 3 years with him. But we got to talk.
There's also just like there's no opportunity to blame him because of how poorly the season has gone offensively. Whereas last season, you had guys holding their end of the bargain. Whereas now it's like, okay, well, it feels like a cheap shot to go after Vlad, considering how awful everyone else has been relative to expectations. Like George Springer, Bo Bichette, Justin Turner, all the guys
and
who are around him coming up.
Yeah, and the league as a whole. Yeah.
Right. So I will I'll give it to Vlad. He's kind of coasted a bit. He kind of the sibling that's not quite as bad as the other one, so that mom and dad don't notice his flaws as much. So I respect it. It's all right. We got you, Vlad.
All right, as we always do, finishing off the show is previewing the upcoming series that starts tonight. The Jays take on the Red Sox at home in what is going to be a surprise to a lot of fans, considering the narrative that we've pushed this year, which games in June probably not mattering as much, but this series certainly freaking matters. You are 1 game below 500. You are a game and a half back of the Red Sox. You want to stand any chance at falling ass backwards into a wild card spot at the end of the year. This series and the series in a week from now against the Sox in Boston is one of the biggest series of the year, to be honest. If we're being completely honest, you need this tiebreaker if you want to stand a chance of making that wild card at the end of the year. I know, obviously, you're 4.5 games back of the wild card. Boston's not just the team in front of you. There's Minnesota as well. You need to be in front of them as well. But at minimum, you need to be in front of Boston. And Boston is the team that the Toronto Blue Jays, if they can, figure things out and everything goes the right way for 2 series against Boston, and you like I said, you fall ass backwards into a 500 record at the end of the year. If you're ahead of Boston, that's the one team that you probably could be ahead of. Them and Tampa, obviously. Tampa's been brutal this year, but Toronto needs to win this series, and you have no excuse of not winning this one. Kikuchi, Bassett, and Gausman going for you at home. Bassett, as I said, every time we talk about him on the road, statistically, he's been a poor starting pitcher, but at home, especially at Rogers Center, he's been dominant. So you have no excuse to not lose this series, to not win this series against Boston, especially if you think that you are a playoff contender.
Yeah, first of all, it's kind of weird that it's like the second half of June, the first time we're seeing the first Boston series all season long. I mean, obviously with this new schedule where you're playing all the teams and obviously you're playing your division less, this is going to happen. But yes, it's still pretty odd that we're here in it's coming out really the summer's next week. The officially first day of summer's next week, and just getting into the first Red Sox series of the year. To your point, you mentioned how good the Blue Jays pitching staff is in this series, their starters, the probables. My counter to that is that's not the reason we're worried. They can't win a game if you're -1, unfortunately.
Right.
So I expect the Blue Jays starters to hold their own and give them some good starts. Boston, for the most part, a pretty average team. I think that they weren't expected to be great at all coming into this season, even though some of their numbers have some of the underlying numbers show they're pretty much above average.
I'll say this: you go top to bottom. You go runs per game, runs given up per game, all the pitching stats that are important, all the offensive stats that are important. They are a far better team than we are, and we're one game below 500, and they're just 2 games above 500. So I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword for both of us. I think we aren't as good as our record, obviously, and I think they are a bit under. And their record, I don't think necessarily portrays how good they actually have been.
They've actually been. Yeah, no, that's kind of the vibe I got when looking at so far the numbers coming into the series. But regardless, the Red Sox, as well as they've played so far this season, they've basically been around a 500 team the entire season. So obviously, for whatever reason, there's something that's impeding them from being a well above 500 team like their underlying numbers suggest. So hopefully the Blue Jays can exploit whatever that is. I'm sure they've done enough scouting, a lot more scouting than we have. So they can put that together, but it's important that they score runs. Boston's pitching staff has surprisingly been very good this season. So how are they going to score runs? I mean, my answer is not to hit Justin Turner and George Springer back-to-back, but that's what's going on right now. So Blue Jays, Red Sox, AL East, anything can happen, man. So hopefully they find a way to win this series. You need to find a way to win this series. And by doing so, you'll be 500, which me and James talked about. That's sort of the bare minimum in terms of having any expectations. If you're not a 500 team, you're a non-starter in terms of conversation, despite the fact that the American League and just, wild card spots in general with this new format, you can get in with 84, 85 wins. You still got to be over 500. So winning
in the American
series,
League, that's significantly more difficult too.
Right. So a 500 team, you're not making the postseason with a 500 record. I can guarantee you that almost. So this would be a good series. You win this series, you're back to 500. You're building off against that series win against Cleveland. So win series, and I think that's a very, very reasonable expectation with the Red Sox coming to town.
Yeah, and for all the Jays fans that are gonna, look at the TV screens casually over the next 2 weeks, and you're gonna be like, didn't they just play the Red Sox? Didn't they just play? Yes, they did. They're playing the Guardians twice, home and home, and they're playing the Red Sox twice, home and home. This is our home series against the Red Sox right now. So we have a lot of games that mean a lot going forward over the next week or so. Obviously, we mentioned in previous podcasts that it goes even further than that. But in terms of where our playoff picture stands, this next week and a half is huge for the Toronto Blue Jays and can do a lot for changing the narrative on where this season is headed. That's everything I have to provide for today. Rob, do you have any final thoughts?
One last thing. I didn't look at the baseball. I didn't look at the Fangraphs postseason projections. I've kept an eye on that. I have looked at the Baseball Reference ones. They went up a tick there. So the Blue Jays, after winning a series against a team that they weren't expected to win, they made a little bit of progress in that aspect. So that's what you got to do if you're gonna make those playoff odds. Yep, you got to win series against the good teams. So they beat a good team against Cleveland, and now hopefully they can beat a pretty good team against Boston.
What is the percentage at right now?
Oh, but it's not good. It's still, I think it's like on Fangraphs in the 20s and then single digits on Baseball Reference. So still not, still looking pretty bleak. But with a few more series wins against the good teams, hopefully that'll change gradually.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching the Blue Jay Center podcast presented by the Sick Podcast Network. We will see you next time, potentially on Thursday after the Boston Red Sox series.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast Blue Jay Center on YouTube, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts.